Once again, we are headed into the end of the year when most of us are spending more time being social with holiday parties, gatherings, and generally just celebrating making it through another year. And at the same time, I always find myself going through inventory in my head of makeup that I can use during these months on rotation that I know are going to be fail-proof. And I feel like that always leads me back to wondering about long-lasting lip products. Every so often, I start to wonder about bi-phase lipsticks. Bi-phase lipsticks are going to be the lipsticks that are typically a two-part system. So one part is the pigment that kind of like dries down on the lips, and then the other part is the sealant to keep the entire lip on, ideally for hours at a time. So this led me to the question that I wonder every single year, which one on the market is actually the best? So I spent the last few weeks picking out some of the most loved bi-phase long-lasting lipsticks so I could finally answer that question with you, and honestly for myself. And to really figure out which one is the best of the best, I wore each one several times for you guys, and the questions that I wanted to answer for each one are as follows. 1, how do they feel and are they generally comfortable? 2, are they transfer proof and smudge proof? 3, how long does each one last? What is the wear time? So that's where the wear test will come into play. 4, how do these fade and in what pattern? Because that does matter. 5, is it worth the price? And lastly, who is this for? In the end, I was actually really surprised with a lot of these wear tests, and my memory for some did not serve me, but nevertheless, I set out to find my answer, and in the end, I will share with you guys which one I loved the most. I will be linking all the products we're talking about today, as well as putting them in the YouTube shopping tab for you guys to easily shop. And this video, honestly, to be completely transparent with you guys, took a lot of work and a lot of brain power. So if you guys do shop through my links, I really appreciate it because it does help to support my channel. So without further ado, let's get into the first wear test. The first one I decided to test out is the Chanel Le Rouge Duo Ultra Tenue shade 188 Caramel Beige. I feel like this one definitely has a cult following. This has been around for a long time. They have done multiple shade expansions of this one, and in doing this video, it was my very first time actually trying this out. I feel like for a long time, people thought if you wanted a really good long wear budge proof lipstick, then you would have to splurge. So I thought that it was necessary for me to test this one out to kind of get a baseline of what most people would consider the best. Firstly, let's talk about the feel, the application, and the comfort of this one. So upon first application, this one had a very, very thin pigment layer. It almost felt like it was a little bit oily, almost like a slippery lip balm upon application. In terms of the color, this is going to be the most sheer of the ones in the video. However, I still wouldn't really call this a sheer pigment. I would still categorize this as being a medium pigmentation. It's very common for a lot of these bi-phase lipsticks to have almost like a varnish lacquer look when it comes to the pigmented side, and then you top it with a glossy top. This one, however, definitely does come off much more normal lipstick-esque, if that makes sense. It's kind of hard to tell because the shade is actually very similar to my natural lip color, but yes, it is more on the medium buildable side of things. The color itself felt really comfortable going on, and when it dried down, and also the gloss coat over it felt like a really substantial lip gloss coat, not necessarily a sealant on the lips. The inner lip did feel a little bit sticky just because the gloss didn't go in that area. That seems to be a common theme for a lot of these bi-phase lipsticks anyways. Also, pleasantly surprised with the fact that the pigment layer doesn't seep into the lip lines, and the gloss didn't really accentuate any of the lip lines. Throughout the day, I would say that the comfort lasted. The glossy top coat really felt thick and almost slippery, almost like an ideal gloss texture for me. And as that gloss wore away throughout the day, the pigment didn't get tacky on the lips, which I thought was really impressive. And I think a big reason why is because that pigment layer was so thin, there wasn't really too much product to get tacky on the lips. Okay, let's talk about the transfer and smudge proofness of this one. So the first layer, which is the pigment layer, definitely dried down. I would say that it passed the kiss proof test. So kissing the back of my hand, I wasn't able to see any of the actual color come off. Really, it was just that gloss top coat. And like I mentioned with both layers, the pigment is transfer waterproof, and the gloss does transfer, but it is thick enough to where you still have some of the gloss on your lips after kissing the back of your hand and drinking and eating light meals. And before we get any further in the video, I think it is very important to remind you guys that with these biphase lipsticks, it is super important to let that first layer dry and then going over it with the sealant. It is not going to be transfer and smudge proof if that first layer, that pigment layer, is still wet. So in order to get the intended use out of this, you're going to want to make sure that you let that first coat dry. You want to make sure that you part your lips to allow the inner lip to dry as much as possible, because that's where you would typically have transferring and smudging if you didn't let it dry completely. And then again, go over it with the top coat and you should be pretty good to go. This one also definitely passed the drink test, and it lasted through 2 hours of filming, which I think is really impressive. Usually through that much time of filming, I will have to reapply in the middle of it. I will say though, after eating, I did see a little bit of crumbling off and transferring. Now let's talk about the wear test. So like I mentioned, this did last through 2 hours of filming after I initially applied it, and then at 2.5 hours, it was still there after my lunch. This day I did eat a fish sandwich. It was delicious and the pigment was still there, and a little bit of the shine from the gloss was still there as well. At 4.5 hours, the color was definitely still there, but the gloss was pretty much faded at this point, and you could definitely tell that I could probably reapply the gloss if I wanted to, but it wasn't super necessary. I still felt like the lip color looked very good. And by the way, I opted not to reapply any of these throughout the actual wear test. At 7.5 hours, the color again was still there. It was a little bit sticky in the inner lips, kind of how it felt when it was initially applied on the lips, and my lips did feel like I could use some lip balm at this point. I would have probably reapplied if I wasn't doing a wear test. Like if this was a regular day of wear, at this point at 7.5 hours, I probably would have reapplied. At 8 hours, I didn't really have too much more to update you guys on, since it was only 30 minutes since the last time. It pretty much still looked the same. And then at 9 hours after dinner, the color was still there, mostly on the outsides and a little bit on the insides of my lips. And again, it could be because of the color I chose. It wasn't as noticeable. I can't speak on any bold red lips or bright pinks or anything like that, but I do feel like it wasn't super obvious the way that it was like fading on my lips. And like I mentioned, throughout the entire day of wear, I didn't reapply, but at the end of the night, I wanted to see how this would reapply without removing what I had on my lips. I went ahead and reapplied both sides, and it reapplied really lovely, and nothing looked weird, nothing stuck funny, and I was very happy with it. Now let's talk about the fade of this one. The fade, in my opinion, was a very gentle and even fade. Throughout the day, it stayed put. And I would say that most of the fading happened when I was actually eating and maybe a little bit of drinking, but I think the eating really made the fading happen. The first signs of fading with this one was on the insides of the lips, because the color I chose is very similar to my natural lips. Again, I don't think that it was that harsh. I did notice that the line of demarcation wasn't a very obvious line. Like I feel like it was very, very, again, gently and naturally fading on the lips like a normal lipstick would. There was also no crumbling, no bunching or flaking or peeling of any kind with the pigment. It kind of just disappeared, and it doesn't settle into the lip lines, which was really, really nice. Okay, now do I think that this is worth the price? I definitely think that it's worth the price if you're looking for a really long lasting lipstick that is comfortable and has a really nice shade range. I love that the shade range has colors that are very slight variances of each other. Don't get me wrong, it was kind of difficult for me to pick a shade because all of them seemed very, very similar, but I ended up really liking the color that I chose, and I feel like it's one that I could wear on an everyday basis. It really just allows you to pick the perfect shade with the perfect undertone. I feel like if you were looking for a nude or a brown or a red or a pink, there were enough variances of each of those categories for me to really pick out one that I really liked. A couple more thoughts that I had and I want to call out for this one. This This one has my favorite brush tip of the bunch for the sealant. It does have a regular brush tip, but I find with some of the sealants, they can be a little bit stiff or create stiffness in the brush, but this one stays very nice and spread out, like fanned out. It doesn't get too difficult to work with, and it just kind of glides over the lips. And I also love that this doesn't sit on the lips like a biphase lipstick would. I really don't know how else to describe it, but it has a little bit of like that sheerness to it, like I mentioned, where it doesn't look like paint or varnish or like lacquer on the lips. It almost helps the liquid lipstick look more natural in a way. Next, of course, I had to bring in one of the drugstore favorites, which is the Maybelline Vinyl Ink lipstick. And this is a liquid lip color that I have done a video about in the past. And I remember really, really loving this formula and this lipstick shade. These are still considered biphase lipsticks, by the way, because you are required to shake up both the pigment and the sealant together, and in doing that it creates that long-lasting seal that more traditional biphase lipsticks give you. So I had this one in the shade Punchy, and I ended up going out to buy a fresh new tube because the one that I had seemed to have gone off a little bit, or like it wasn't like it wouldn't mix as well. Maybe the actual product in it had dried out. So I really wanted to make sure that I got the freshest one possible so I could thoroughly test this for you guys. So upon application, this is super easy to apply since you have both phases going on at once inside this one tube. I like that the doe foot on this is stiffer and it gives you more of a chance to be precise with the application. I find that's really important, especially for a lip product that's actually going to dry down and it's going to be a little bit more difficult to fix later on. So I really appreciate the doe foot that they have on this. So like I said, you want to make sure that you shake this up really, really well before you apply it to the lips. And when you first apply it, it feels very thick. I think this one has a longer required drying time since you're essentially drying down both layers at once. And I also noticed that I had to have my lips parted even wider to make sure that the inner parts of my lips don't touch so they could like fully dry. And side note, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but whenever you have to like let a lip product dry, I feel like it makes me salivate for some reason when I sit there and have my mouth open and try to like dry my lip product. I don't know, that's kind of weird. Anyways, after a few minutes of letting this dry, I did notice that the inner part of my lips still felt a little bit tacky and not necessarily like fully dried down. And the thing with the biphase lipsticks we're talking about today that require you to apply them separately is that the clear gloss portion will usually get rid of that sticky, tacky texture. But since this is a 2-in-1, it doesn't really get that chance. The pigment layer doesn't necessarily get a chance to dry on its own before going over it with the sealant. So overall, I feel like it just requires more time and it's just naturally going to be more sticky. I felt like this was more sticky and tacky than I remembered them being. It also wasn't as glossy as I wanted it to be, but I remember that about these. So I decided to add a clear gloss on top of it because in the past I have done that to make them more shiny, and that usually works really well. And for this application, I did use the Essence Shine lip gloss, but when I did this, I did notice that some of the liquid lipstick transferred onto the doe foot of the lip gloss. And to be honest, I don't know if it's because I didn't let it fully dry down or because the clear gloss was kind of wiping it away and breaking down that formula. I have a feeling it might have been the latter. Okay, let's talk transfer and smudge proof claims. As you saw, like I mentioned, the color did transfer a little bit onto the gloss doe foot, and immediately after that I did make my lunch and it was transferring a little bit on my bottle as well. But I will say that it didn't feel like as much as any other liquid lipstick or bullet lipstick or anything in another form. Okay, let's talk wear test. So I did apply this, and like I mentioned, right after that I did make my lunch. I had a salad with some crab cakes, and you could see that that there's an obvious line of demarcation on the inner lip, and it was transferring onto my bottle as well, which was kind of disappointing. And this one left a little bit of that shiny coat, but I'm pretty sure that had to do with the Essence lip gloss. I think that helped with this a lot. But what I was noticing was that this formula was looking a little bit crepey on my bottom lip after lunch. At the 3-hour mark, it did still kind of look the same as it did after lunch. The fading and the obvious line wasn't as obvious in this footage, and I think it might have been the lighting. The color in general did look a little bit lighter here, so I think that's why it didn't look as obvious in this footage. At the 6-hour mark, I hadn't eaten anything since lunchtime, and I went out for a few hours, and the lipstick I think still looked really good and still fairly glossy. Didn't really bother me, wasn't feeling like too sticky or anything like that. At the 8-hour mark, this was after dinner, and there was no more shine on my lips, but the color was still very prominent on my lips, and in this footage you can actually see it fading even further past the inner lip and more onto the outer lip area. And I also tried to get some footage of this with flash so you guys could see it a little bit better. At the 11-hour mark, the color still, again, was very noticeable on the lips, but there was definite fading on the inner lip like I had mentioned. The lips looked visibly dry here, and I think they looked more dry than they actually felt. It almost felt like nothing was on my lips at this point. It wasn't sticky, it wasn't tacky, it wasn't glossy either. I just feel like it looked worse than it was. So that was the entire day of wear. In terms of fading, it tended to have a little bit of like a splotchy fade on the inner lip. It looked like the pigment itself was sort of peeling off unevenly, and honestly you probably wouldn't have even noticed just like kind of looking at me a few feet away, but it did continue to fade throughout the day. And I would say that the fading after the 8-hour check-in was as far down my lip as it went. It didn't seem to fade any more than that. And when I was reviewing this footage, I did notice that there was some fading on the top lip as well. And if I were to guess, I think that the top and the bottom lip were sticking to each other after that glossy finish faded away, which was causing the pigment layer to sort of peel off the lips and almost disappear. So my overall thought is that I think that it was really good, but not as great as I remember them being. And I do want to note that this is going to be the most affordable of the lineup that we have today. And honestly, I think that if we are ranking them based on price, then yes, you kind of get what you pay for with this one. So like I mentioned, I did not reapply this on this day, but in the past, I do remember wearing these for like outings and reapplying them and being really happy with them. While it did fade, it did take a really long time for it to fade. So unless you're going to be wearing this an entire day, I feel like you would be fine with reapplying a clear gloss. Also, this one smells really nice to me. It kind of smells more gourmand, like kind of caramel-like. Okay, so who is this one for? I think that if you want to prioritize long wear and you don't really mind reapplying this or like a top coat or something, then this one would be a really good option. And also I was thinking that if you wanted to only use this product for your lip color, then I think it's great since it's more opaque on the lips and you probably wouldn't have to use a lip liner with it because of that. Like this will be your entire lip look in one. Next is a really popular drugstore option. This one is the L'Oreal Infallible Lac Resistance Liquid Lipstick, and I have this one in the shade Worth It Medium. I did do a little short video and a short wear test on this. I will link it down below, but I will recap my past experience as well as my most recent wear test with this as well. Like the Maybelline one, this one is still categorized as being a biphase since it's one of those that requires you to shake it up to make sure that the pigment and the sealant are mixed together. So it does still have both of those characteristics, but again, it's just in one tube. For this one, I did decide to try to use a lip liner to make it look less one-dimensional like the Maybelline one kind of was because it was so opaque. So for this, I used a lip stain because I figured that a lip stain would be more intense looking underneath a more opaque lipstick. lipstick. And for this application, I did use the NYX lip stain in the shade Up to No Good. I left it looking more intense on purpose on the lips before applying this liquid lipstick, and it really did add just a little bit more dimension that I was craving. So application and the feel and comfort of this one. So while again, this is sort of like a 2-in-1, it doesn't feel as thick to me as the Maybelline one. If I'm comparing them that closely, I do feel like there's a definite difference in the way that they feel. I do also really like the skinny doe foot on this one because it allows for more control. Now, it definitely still has that more sticky, tacky feeling when you first apply this, and you do have to give it time to fully dry down as well. I will usually just wait a few minutes, and usually that will be fine. Again, make sure that your lips are fully apart so that you give the inner lip area enough time to dry down. It does feel very similar to the Maybelline one in the inner lip where it does feel sticky, but overall I would say that this one doesn't feel as tacky. And I think that that might also have to do with the fact that this one is a more shiny option of the two drugstore options, but I still kind of wanted some extra gloss. So again, I did end up adding that Essence lip gloss on top of it, but keep in mind you do risk messing with the longevity of the lipstick because the gloss might have been breaking down the biphase formula. And after using one after the other, the Maybelline and the L'Oreal one, I came to the conclusion that these biphase 2-in-1s are just naturally more sticky. So if you are more sensitive to like a sticky lip product, I think that the biphase ones where it's actually separated would be better. And in general, those seem to be more comfortable right away after applying them. Okay, let's talk about the transfer and smudge proof claims. So I have again tested this one in the past and found that it was most definitely transfer proof. So I think with me adding that additional gloss, it may have broken down that biphase seal and made it transfer a bit here on the doe foot, as you guys see upon this application clip. But I have worn this a couple of times since, and I will say that I do think that this is pretty much transfer proof once you let this set down. And to be extra sure, I did another transfer test with this one, and it does seem to be transfer proof. All right, now on to the wear test. So an hour and a half after applying this lip product, it still looked super, super glossy and almost untouched. I thought it looked really nice at this point. I hadn't eaten anything at this point, and I had only really drank water from my water bottle. At the 4.5-hour mark after eating my lunch, which was pasta and chicken, delicious, it was slightly shiny and the color looked almost untouched. Like there was still some shine, but for the most part, the color was still there. At the 7.5-hour check-in, it looked pretty much the same as the last check-in, and it didn't feel drying, and it still looked very hydrated. Like you can kind of see here when I'm turning my head and stuff, it's catching the light, and you can see that it definitely does look moisturized. I don't know if I would consider this looking glossy, but it doesn't look like my lips are dehydrated at all. Now in terms of fading, this one, there was very minimal fading. There was slight fading on the inner lips, but that was only noticeable when my lips were open, and it never went as far as the Maybelline fading did for me. It really was just like when I was looking super closely. I think it's another one of those cases where if you were talking to me at a regular distance, you probably would have never noticed, but I still had a little bit of shine by the end of the day, which I thought was really impressive. Again, we did have that gloss to start off with though. When talking about the fading, I felt like this lip color and this formulation in general didn't really look as like worn, I guess, as the Maybelline one did by the end of the day. This one almost looked fresh. Like I probably could have worn it just as long as the Maybelline one and have it look incredible at the end of the day. I'm almost certain that I have worn it as long as the Maybelline one and I had no issues with it. And I've done several wear tests, like I said, with this product, and every time it has really impressed me. Now, do I think this is worth the price? I definitely think that this is worth the price. It is more expensive though for a drugstore, and I think that's kind of the case with a lot of L'Oreal now, but you are getting high-end quality at a more affordable price, and you can usually find L'Oreal on sale at different retailers. So if you wanted multiple shades, or if there was was something else that you wanted to pick up from L'Oreal, you could probably get this even cheaper than the regular retail price. Now, who do I think that this is for? I feel like this is for a very no-fuss lipstick wearer who's looking for a really quick and easy lipstick that you probably won't have to reapply throughout the day. And if you like something that's more on the range of reds and pinks and stuff, it is more limited than something like the Maybelline one and the Chanel one. I think that if you're someone who doesn't find the need to have super long-lasting lipsticks or wear them often, like if you only need them for like those one-off occasions, but you want to make sure that you have like a reliable one on hand that's not going to cost you a ton since you won't be reaching for it often, then I think that this is definitely the one. Now let's talk about the Kiko Milano Unlimited Double Touch. I did order these online and I really wasn't sure what shade to pick up. So I have the shade 103, 131, and 120. So to be transparent with you guys, I did do 2 wear test days because the first one I completely botched that one. So on day 1, I used the shade 103. I stupidly put a lip oil on top of this the very first time instead of the sealant layer. Obviously that was a mistake. I should have known. It definitely broke down that pigment layer and that biphase thing, and it made it transfer and fade on the lips. So it really just wore like a regular lipstick. Moving on to the real wear test day, day 2 of this. So for this test, I did use the shade 131. And again, I used the same NYX Up to No Good lip liner stain pen on the outer perimeter of my lips. I do really like the stain pens because it doesn't seem to add any extra hydration or mess with the biphase lipstick. And I think also because I use the lip stain pen on the outside perimeters of my lips, it really didn't affect it at all. So on application, these feel extremely thin and almost like they have like this serum texture to them when it comes to the pigment side of it. You're able to kind of press your lips together when you're applying it to further evenly distribute the pigment layer without it feeling sticky or like you're making it patchy. And if you do this, then you have an even thinner application because of that. So I would say that this definitely can give you more of a sheer coverage, but you can build it up to be a pretty decent medium coverage. I also made sure to let this color dry completely before topping it with the sealant side. You can really make sure by tapping a little bit, like very lightly on the actual first layer with your finger to make sure that it's completely dry before going in with your sealant side. And then once you go in with the sealant, it is not sticky at all. It completely loses any form of stickiness, even on the inner lip. That sealant feels like a very thick, non-sticky gloss. It looks very, very juicy on the lips, and I would definitely say that this is the highest shine sealant of the bunch that we tried. Transfer and smudge proof claims. This one is definitely very smudge proof, very transfer proof. I really didn't have any issues even after I applied this and I was drinking from my water bottle. All right, now on to the wear test. So I applied this and the first check-in we have is after lunch. So after lunch, I found that this was still very glossy. I'd say probably the same amount of gloss as L'Oreal initially gives. And the color itself, again, looked super untouched. Like it looked perfect at this point. After 2.5 hours, at this point I had filmed and the color still looked really great. And at 5.5 hours, this was after dinner. So the color did fade a little bit towards the inner lip, but it wasn't like an obvious line of demarcation like something like the Maybelline one gave me. And it slightly looked better than what the L'Oreal one gave me. It almost looked like a natural gradient on the lips. And again, maybe because of the color that I was wearing, you couldn't really tell as much. It did have a little bit of moisture left, but again, I wouldn't really necessarily call it glossy at this point. I also still felt like it didn't feel sticky, which was really nice. At 7.5 hours, this pretty much looked the same as our last check-in, maybe a little bit more fading on the bottom lip from like drinking water and stuff. But at this point, the lips did feel like they could use a little bit of lip balm, but they didn't they didn't like feel dry, but absentmindedly, this is where I would have just like reached for a balm and put it on. But I don't think that it felt uncomfortably dry. So this one definitely was the most natural fade of all of the ones that we tried in this video. And again, maybe because of the color, but the inner portion of my lips itself really didn't leave me with any like obvious marks, which I was very happy with. The fade was just like extremely natural. It didn't cling to my lips in a weird way. It almost looked like a regular bullet lipstick fading and not necessarily like a liquid lipstick fading. Now, do I think that this is worth the price? I definitely feel like this is worth the price. It is a little bit more expensive than the L'Oreal one, so I would say that this is kind of in the mid-range of all of the ones that we're trying today. Even though it is a bit more pricey, it's definitely worth it because of the amount of time that it wore, the way that it was extremely comfortable throughout the lifespan of it on my lips, and also because of like that gentle fade. I will say the biggest downfall for this one is the brush of the sealant. So the brush on the sealant portion of these are very stiff and they kind of fray. You can probably see here that they are already starting to fray even after just a few uses. I think that the bristles aren't long enough to really fan out the way that you would want them to, or you would need them to, combined with this formula. So kind of disappointed in that brush, but it's not unusable. And also this line has my favorite color options by far. They have so many beautiful, more natural shades, kind of like the shades that I really enjoy for my complexion. They really remind me of the Chanel shade range, but like for a fraction of the price. Now, who do I think these are for? So I really think that if you are someone who prioritizes comfort, but you don't want to compromise on the longevity of the biphase lipstick, then this is really great. Also, very importantly, I think it's great for someone if you have a similar complexion to mine and you find that these longer wearing lipstick shades at the drugstore and stuff are too harsh on you, or they just don't really suit you. These have been by far the best shades for my complexion and for my preferences. And lastly, our second most expensive of the bunch, and definitely more of a luxury one. This is the Dior On Stage lipstick, and I have this one in the shade 222 Confident Nude. I kept going back and forth on this one if I should add it to this wear test video. It wasn't super clear if this was supposed to be a biphase lipstick that was like transfer and budge proof and smudge proof and stuff, but upon further reading, like really looking on their site, on Ulta, on Sephora, it did say that this is supposed to be a biphase and it's meant to be long lasting. It's supposed to have over 16 hours of wear. Long story short, I did add this to the list. And I have thoughts. So this one feels like a very thick satin lipstick. It does tug a little bit upon application, but I didn't hate it. I felt like it was allowing this to still be comfortable somehow. I don't really know how to explain it. The texture is very different from any of the ones that we talked about today. And I was trying to think of a comparison for how this felt on the lips, but truly, I didn't really have one. Like when you're applying it, it does seem like it's going to be sticky, but then when you rub your lips together, it is very slick and smooth. And it gave me a lot more shine than I anticipated coming out of a bullet lipstick. I would say that this had pretty high coverage. And oddly enough, after a couple of minutes, it does feel like it actually dries down, especially on the inner lip as well. It felt more like a bullet lipstick and less sticky and tacky than like the Maybelline and L'Oreal one, and it doesn't feel slippery or glossy somehow. It's somewhere in between. It's very hard for me to explain this texture, so good job to Dior for coming out with something that feels very innovative, because I can't really explain it. I will say, if you are sensitive to scent, this has a very, very strong scent. It has almost like this sweet floral scent, and I was trying to remember what it reminded me of, and it either smells like a L'Oreal bullet lipstick or a Rimmel bullet lipstick. Like, it doesn't smell like what I would expect a high-end lipstick to smell like. Now, here is where this one gets very interesting to me. This one, in terms of bean transfer proof and smudge proof like they claim, It is definitely not. It's definitely not transfer proof. Doing a kiss test on the back of my hand, you could see that it clearly transfers the color. You do still maintain that gloss, and it doesn't look like any of the color came off, but it does transfer. Also, this was not smudge proof. I don't know where they came up with that claim. I ate a Costco hot dog on this day because you gotta get a hot dog or a pizza when you go to Costco. It pretty much faded anywhere on my lips that my food touched, and I was left with only having the lipstick on the outer part of my lips, and it was very obvious. And again, because I did choose more of a natural color, I think it was more forgiving, but I will say that if you choose a red lip or something in this formula, you will probably notice it. It'll be very obvious. In terms of fading, it didn't really have a chance to fade. I guess if we consider it fading while I'm eating, it did come off pretty evenly. Like, it wasn't bunching or chunking up or anything like that. It just kind of removed itself. I think that this one wears like a standard lipstick if you're like eating or drinking. And to give it the benefit of the doubt, I do think that this would probably last a lot longer if you were in a situation where you weren't eating or drinking anything. But at that point, it's probably only because the opacity of this one is higher, not necessarily because the staying power is higher. Now, do I think this is worth the price? Very simply, no, I don't. Who do I think that this is for? Because I do think that all of these lipsticks are for someone who is looking for a specific thing. So I think that this lipstick is going to be great if you want a full opacity lipstick. Again, something that you can kind of customize, but it reaches that full high coverage, and it also has the shine, so you don't have to go in with a gloss top. It's kind of like that 2-in-1, and also something that still feels quite comfortable on the lips. I think it's great if maybe you don't need extreme long wear like these other ones that we've already talked about, but you want to have like a lip color that you don't want to have to touch up during an outing or an event or a special occasion or something. Like maybe if you have a tiny little bag or no bag at all and you don't want to carry your lipstick around, you can quickly apply this beforehand and then not worry about it throughout whatever you're doing, as long as whatever you're doing is not eating or drinking. Okay, so we have finished all of our wear tests and all of like the in-depth information that I feel like you guys may have for all of these. And while I showed you guys 1, maybe 2 days of wear tests for each of these, please remember and please know that I have used all of these several times, either before or after doing these wear tests, and have really gotten an idea of each one of these products. So I'll be pulling from like my overall experience with all of these. So all in all, I do think that the biphases that were separated wore the best. I found that they were more comfortable. They definitely faded better because they were 2 separate layers. And I feel like they felt almost undetectable throughout the day while I wore them. The Maybelline and L'Oreal ones are really great concepts, but I do think that you lose some of the benefit of having more of that bulletproof longevity and also comfort when you mix the two. And again, this is not just based on the wear tests today where I did top them with glosses. This is also coming from past experiences. The way I see these is like when you paint your nails with regular nail polish. So if you let each coat fully dry between and you have like a thin layer of each, then you get more of a smoother, long-lasting finish that's not going to dent or chip or whatever as fast. But when you layer on the nail polish before each layer is dry and the layers are too soft, then they can get more dented or more smudged or, you know, affect the longevity of them. So the Maybelline and the L'Oreal ones kind of prevent you from letting both layers dry since they are mixed together, which in my head affects the overall performance. Now, after everything is said and done, I truly think that the best one of the 5 formulas that we tried in this video is the Kiko Milano Unlimited Double Touch formula. I really feel like from the first application and how smooth and thin and serumy they feel to the way that it stays on and wears literally all day, this one impressed me the most. This one seems to be one that kind of would fit and integrate into my usual makeup routine the best. Although I do not like the sealant brush, I do love that the sealant feels like a plush gloss and I just cannot get over how much I love these colors and how they just look so flattering on my complexion. They're very, very comfortable throughout the day, and you can also reapply them if you ever find you need to. I have tested that, and I do think that they reapply very well, even if you're only going in with the sealant. And like I said, they are more in the mid-range in terms of price, but I honestly feel like it's so worth it if you find yourself reaching for a buy phase every now and then and you want something that is going to be very, very foolproof. Personally, I really do feel like this is going to get a ton of use from me throughout the holiday season and probably beyond. All right, guys, and that was everything for this video. Please let me know all of your thoughts down below, as well as if you have experiences with any of these products that we talked about today. I would love if we could use the comment section as somewhere we can kind of like pick each other's brains, you know? And as a reminder, you guys, I'm going to be leaving everything linked down below, as well as in the YouTube shopping tab for you guys. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more from me, then I'm going to leave a video right here in case you are interested. And until next time, I hope you guys take care of yourselves, and I will see you very soon. Bye.